So to start, we're going to make our bechamel sauce. And the key to a bechamel sauce is we're going to use equal parts butter and flour to form a paste in the very beginning, and then slowly, gradually add in our milk and then cook that down until it's nice and thick. So let's start by adding our butter. I'm using 1/3 of a cup of unsalted butter here. And we're gonna melt that down until it's just starting to foam and bubble a little bit. Okay, so the butter is just starting to bubble just a little bit. We don't want to brown the butter. We just want to bring it up to a little bit of sort of that bubbling. You want to hear some of those bubbles as it's melting down. So we're going to add our flour. And this is 1/3 of a cup of flour, so it's the same proportion or the same measurement as our butter. You always want it to be equal amounts. And then we're gonna whisk this up into a paste. And this is gonna form the base of our bechamel and will help thicken the sauce over time. So just whisk this for about a minute and let it cook until it's nice and golden and you don't see any lumps of flour. We're gonna slowly add our milk. We're gonna add about 3 cups of milk total. So I'm gonna start just with about 1/2 a cup at a time. Whisk it in. We'll add another 1/2 a cup. And each time you wanna whisk out the lumps of the flour and the butter as you go. So by the time you've added all of the milk, you should notice that the sauce is getting a lot smoother, it's less bumpy and lumpy. And so at this point, we're going to turn the heat up just a little bit and bring the milk to a very gentle simmer. And while we do that, we're gonna stir every 30 seconds or so just to make sure that the bottom doesn't burn and no other clumps form. Okay, so our sauce is starting to thicken up a little bit. We really want it to be thick enough to coat the back of a spoon. So we're almost there. It's still a little thin. I'm gonna let it cook just a little bit longer. You almost want the consistency to be like a cheese dip. It should be fairly thick. So we're gonna add in our seasonings. We're gonna do about 1/8 of a teaspoon of fresh nutmeg. This is a classic ingredient in the bechamel sauce. It just adds a little touch of sweetness. And finally, we're gonna add in our salt. I have a little bit over a teaspoon here. You're gonna wanna adjust this to taste. And we're adding this at the very end because now the sauce has cooked down and so it's a little bit more concentrated. If we had added it at the beginning, we might risk adding too much salt and then it cooks down and it's too salty once some of the liquid cooks out. So add in our salt. Okay, I think we are there as far as consistency goes. It's gonna continue to thicken up as it cools down. So I'm gonna remove this from the heat. And lastly, we're gonna add in our cheese. So I have about 1/2 a cup of Parmesan cheese. You typically don't put cheese in your bechamel sauce, but since we're making this for a lasagna and we want it to be nice and cheesy and have lots of that flavor, we're going to add in some Parmesan here. So it's almost like a Parmesan bechamel. And just let that gently melt down. And one last thing is we will taste it just to make sure that the salt is the right amount in here. Perfect, yeah. It is fairly salty. We do want it to have a good amount of flavor though, since we're layering this in our lasagna. Okay, so we're gonna let this cool and we're gonna cover it with our lid just to prevent any film forming on top. And just set that aside until we're ready to layer our lasagna. So for the next step, we're going to make our asparagus puree. We're gonna start by trimming our asparagus. We have about 2 pounds of asparagus or 2 bunches of asparagus. The easiest way to trim your asparagus is just to snap them like this, and wherever they break off, that's gonna break off the tougher parts of the stem. So you don't even really need a knife. You can just snap it like that. It's the bend and snap. If you had some really large asparagus, you might consider peeling them just a little bit just to get off any of these tough outer edges. But here, these are pretty small and pretty delicate, so I think that they're good as is, especially since we're going to be pureeing everything anyways. So we're gonna cook our asparagus in a pot of salted boiling water. and we're just going to blanch them. So we're really only going to leave them in here for a couple of minutes until they're tender but not too mushy. While your asparagus are blanching, you can prepare an ice bath, because we're going to directly transfer them into this to stop the cooking process as quickly as possible. And this just really helps to maintain the color, the really nice green, vibrant color of the asparagus, as well as some of that flavor in there. So once your asparagus are nice and tender, we can go ahead and just transfer them directly to our ice bath. Okay, so we're gonna take our cooled asparagus and just trim off the ends here where it's really nice and tender. We're gonna save these little, the tops of the asparagus to use throughout the lasagna. It'll add a really nice little bit of color, and it'll be clear that this is an asparagus lasagna. So for our asparagus layer, we're going to puree together all of our blanched asparagus stems. And we're gonna also add in 1 garlic clove and 3 tablespoons of the Zucchi pesto flavored olive oil. So just gonna give this layer a nice little hint of pesto and brighten things up a little bit. So to finish this layer, we're gonna add just a little bit of lemon juice, about half a lemon, and then add a little bit of salt. We're gonna season this to taste. So start with just a little bit. We want it to be quite flavorful. This is really what's gonna season the whole dish. And we'll just give this a taste and see if we need to adjust anything. It's really nice. The pesto olive oil adds just a really nice subtle hint of pesto. I really like it. Finally, we're going to layer up our lasagna. We're gonna start with a very thin layer of the bechamel sauce on the bottom. This will keep everything from sticking, followed by our lasagna sheets. And here we're using the no-boil lasagna sheets, so these are gonna be fine. They're gonna cook as we bake the lasagna. If you were using just regular lasagna sheets, you'd probably want to parboil them first before layering them. We're gonna do another layer of bechamel sauce. And the key here is that we wanna make sure that we have enough of each layer to get us through about 5 layers. So pace yourself as you're going along. And then we'll do a layer of the asparagus puree. And with this, I'm just going to really dollop it on across. And when we put on our next layer of lasagna sheets, it's gonna spread out a little bit. I love this vibrant green color from this puree. It's so lovely. Perfect for spring. Okay, we'll do a layer of our grated parm. And then we'll just sprinkle a few of these asparagus tips in between each layer, which adds a bit of texture, a bit more color. And then finally, you can do a very small drizzle of the pesto EVOO. Okay, and we'll go on to the next layer. So we're gonna repeat that until we get to our 5th layer, which we'll top with more bechamel at the end. So for the very last layer, we're going to do just the bechamel, some Parmesan, and the asparagus tips on top. And you want to arrange the asparagus tips so they're nice and pretty on top. And finally, we're going to drizzle on top just a little bit more of the pesto olive oil. We'll cover this with aluminum foil and we'll bake it in a preheated oven at 400 degrees for about 20 minutes or until it's nice and bubbly. Okay, so it's been 20 minutes and the lasagna is really nice and bubbly. We're gonna stick it back in uncovered for just another 5 minutes just to get it a little bit golden and brown on top. It's nice and bubbly and there's some nice golden spots on top. It just looks absolutely beautiful. So creamy and cheesy. I love it. Exactly what a lasagna should be. It's so creamy. And get that nice little bite from the asparagus tips that are in there. A little bit of that pesto flavor. This is perfect for spring. Delicious. So I really hope that you enjoyed watching this asparagus lasagna recipe. We will link the recipe somewhere around here below or in our bio if you'd like to learn more and get the full details of it. And I really hope that you'll also give the Zucchi pesto olive oil a try. It's one of my favorites. It's Perfect for spring, absolutely delicious. Thanks for watching, ciao.